Okay, so I think we can get started now. It's the last session of the day, so welcome everyone. Welcome back. I hope you had a quick break from after the last session was slightly longer than expected. So we're at the bottom of the page here. So get your hands dirty with VMware Tanzu. And when I signed up for this session, I was like, I'm going to show some of the resources, some of the materials that you can follow up with yourself after the event. I hope you're hungry for playing around with some new technologies and getting to see some of the technologies in action and playing with it in more detail. So who am I? So my name is Björn. I'm part of the Central European solution engineer organizations. I've been playing with the cloud native ecosystem for quite some time. I'm a big fan of the Tanzu portfolio, even before it was born. Been cheering with the folks on the Pivotal side for a long time. So yeah, my key areas of focus are application platforms, so everything that runs on the VMware infrastructure, but also in a multi-cloud reality. If you want to follow me, just find me on Twitter, or you can also listen to the German-speaking VMware podcast nowadays, which was just launched the other week. So, but that's just a side note, right? So I'll do everything today in the browser here. So that's very, it's a different approach. I think you saw PowerPoint and other areas enough for today. So this QR code will lead you to this page, which is kind of Inception in itself. And I have listed a lot of resources here that I'll briefly touch on, right? So you can follow me observing some of those resources live here and see how that feels, and then decide if you want to sign up for it yourself, or if you just want to get started right away in this session here. So I'm cool with that as well. So again, for me, the most important effort is and the most important key takeaway for you is you have a way to actually get started and play with some of the technology and leverage some of the cool things that the extended global Tanzu team has actually prepared, because that has been something that VMware has been doing for a long time, actually building solutions and leaving them in the hands of the organizations that we work with to test this, right? And one thing I want to start with is the developer center. So if you go to this first link here, you'll be redirected to the developer center, which is basically everything in a nutshell, right? You'll find all the components. You can find links to guides, to patterns, to workshops. There is a sample documentation, lots of videos, the blog, and a lot of the Tanzu best practices guides. You can also sort by topic that you're interested in. And of course, we have the tanzu.tv link, which gives you access to a variety of resources as they listed here, right? So from Tanzu Tuesdays to live coding sessions to the Thank God It's Kubernetes sessions that have been started at the Heptio team a long time ago, and then of course the spring related sessions and some of the webinars as well, right? And if you're not into dark mode, you can of course switch to light mode as well. It's just a nice little gimmick on the side here. So let's get started, right? So you go to the workshops slot here. Pardon, it's 5 p.m. after lots of talking today. So, and we have a lot of hands-on workshops here. So you can basically select what you're trying to do. So from a very container basics effort to actually running Spring on Kubernetes and, for example, getting started with Spring Cloud Gateway, you have a lot of choice here, and you can hook into any of these things. I'll just click on the container basics in this case. What pops up is an overview about the workshop itself, and it says login required, so you don't have to pay for any of the logins that are happening here. All you need to do is leave your email address for an account to yeah, to connect into the system and know where you left off and what you've completed already. So that's it, right? So you click start the workshop, and you have a full-blown environment up and running here. So you can see the time that's still allocated to this, right? So the environment will be there for a decent amount of time to complete all of it, right? But this is literally just some get started with container basics. You can start the workshop here, and this will bring up the full-blown instructions. You can basically go through all of these instructions one by one, right? So you can see the first thing is to run a very basic container image. You can type all these commands in here, right? It's a live interactive shell, but you can also just click it and it will automatically execute the command that's in the box here. You can also see that the output that should be visible looks like this, which is of course the case. And then we continue with, okay, let's actually run that image and let's see what kind of images we have, for example, right? So very basic, but very powerful, because you don't have to boot anything up. You don't have to clean up anything afterwards. It's fairly straightforward. And as you can see, it's an environment that is actually live provisioned, right? So this is not some mock-up. It's something to play with, right? So you have that interactive shell. We can go into the system, right, and follow the commands here, just getting started, seeing what's actually in it, right? But we can also end the session, of course, and take another one for a spin, for example. That's a little more complex, right? So let's go back to the developer center here and take, for example, Octant, because that actually runs a graphical UI on top of your Kubernetes clusters. And that's something that's deployed locally on your local desktop machine. And if you follow the link again, this is all spinning up live, right? I'm doing this here, just like you can probably do it while we're in this session. So you go in and set up the environment, right? You deploy something, it's a database that's being deployed, but you can also, and here that's the console view, which is already the Octant view, which gives you a full-blown browser interface right next to your terminal, right? So you can switch between two terminals and the console window right away. You can basically take a look at all the things that are deployed here, right? So we can take a look at the deployments that has just been added here, right? So we can go into this and see the components of it, see the YAML files that have been applied, etc. Right? So again, this is just a snapshot. I don't want to go into the content details of this session. This is literally just for you a starting point on where to find some materials to follow up yourself, right? Okay, coming back again, you can use the QR code to access this site. You can also follow the link up here, but it's probably easier to just go there. And again, I listed some of the workshops that are in the developer center, right? There might be new things coming. I mean, there are conferences where we use these sites. The next one here, the VMware Hands-on Lab, is another area that's being used also for public events and larger events. So I'd say let's go right in here. So if we follow that link again and go to the hands-on lab, so HOL is the short term for it. So we have basically three different areas here. So the Lightning Lab is a 30 minutes or less, very simple, quick dive in into some of the products, right? So those are Lightning Labs. Then we have more comprehensive labs that are basically fully deployed data center environments, if you will. And you can dive into a lot of detail in a lot of products that VMware has. And then there's even games, right, where you can follow certain challenges and put your knowledge to test and actually complete some of the tasks and then show up on on a global leaderboard, if you will, right? So these labs in general, and that's probably just an interesting nugget here to understand. So these labs are basically fully deployed environments. So we deploy a virtual server that hosts the full-blown hypervisor environment, typically at least 3 nodes, if not more. It has all the management capabilities and components in it. And so those labs are being built by product specialists that are sitting in the business units. And so they come up with these scenarios. They build all the virtual machines to the state where it's all up and running. And then they freeze the machines so they can be cloned on demand, right? And what you're going to access here is a fully cloned environment that has been prepared by a specialist, and we're constantly updating these, right? So all the products and solutions and scenarios and all the areas are constantly being updated. So there are 80 live and interactive labs that you can access. So you can just go to the site, right, and go to the labs overview here. If we go to the try now, we should be forwarded to the hands-on lab site, right? This is actually just the short overview. So let me go back to my links here, and we can go to the app modernization labs overview. So it's split up in a variety of pieces, right? So we can go to the catalog for app modernization, for example, so we can see all the labs that are available in this category, right? And then we can spin up basically any of these labs and access them, right? And just to give you an idea how this actually feels, it's let's go for the vSphere with Tanzu, for example, right? So that's the embedded Kubernetes inside the core hypervisor. So we can click enroll, and what happens is it will remind me I have a separate one still running. So I'll end this to save some resources. And I click start this lab, which basically brings me into a pre-check state, right? So it will look for, okay, do you want to run tests? If you have a up-to-date browser, it should actually run just fine. So I'll just start it. This is just for browser compatibility reasons. And you can see the typical deploy time is like 31 seconds for this lab. And you'll see the actual deployment in just a second. So let's give it a few more seconds. Oh, I see stuff on Q&A, is that right? So there is a question. I'm going to answer that in a second, but I see Stefan is answering already. Yes, this is the hands-on labs are, all you need is sign up with an account, right? It's for free. So the interesting thing here is now this is a global environment, and we're currently in the wake-up time of the US time zone. So sometimes this takes a few seconds longer, but it's actually a pretty complex lab in itself. So sometimes it takes a minute longer, right? And I'll show you some of the topics, so I come back to that. So just some of the labs that are available here, right? So we have Tanzu Mission Control, we have Tanzu Kubernetes Grid, Tanzu Application Catalog. There is also a Container, Docker, and Kubernetes 101 lab that has just been updated. We have some operational topics. There is some automation topics available here, and the some of the Lightning labs, so you can also take a look at the service mesh. It's a simulation, right? Because as you saw from Matthias' example earlier, this is actually a pretty complex thing, right? If you don't follow a certain operational preparation, let's put it this way. So you need to have something running to actually observe something in action. So that's part of why sometimes it's actually pre-configured. and running in a state where you don't have to play with it yourself. So that's part of the reason why it's behaving like this. And of course, we're doing this live and it's delayed. Oh goodness. Okay, so what else are we having here? So the giving it another. Let's wait until 3 minutes. And then I'll briefly move over to the other areas that I'd like to share here and then come back to this. Huh, interesting. Okay, so so bored. So the other topics that I have listed here is one is the Kubernetes Academy. So if you're following the Kubernetes ecosystem, you've probably come across this already. So it's a free and also open for anyone area. Yep, of course, always cookies. It's a Kubernetes training site, right? And since you are probably familiar with this topic already, so something that's slightly unrelated but highly related at the same time. So there is a subgroup in the Kubernetes community that is focused on running Kubernetes in Docker. So you can execute local clusters and test a Kubernetes infrastructure in basically anywhere you go, right? So you can run this on your local machine. And in your local machine, this is making it so easy to have just a playground environment running. So the Kubernetes nodes are basically containers running in Docker, right? In local Docker containers. And through that, you have a fully functional Kubernetes cluster. So you can do a lot of the testing and stuff that we were seeing in the Tanzu Developer Center. That's done on a server side, right? But you can have a similar experience locally and have a Kubernetes cluster up and running that can be easily destroyed. So you can spin up clusters and delete clusters through this kind project, which is super powerful, right? So there's a lot of commands that you just execute, right? So the most basic one is literally kind create cluster. It spins up a cluster and you delete the cluster. That's all you need to prepare from a deployment perspective, and then you can execute your commands against these kind clusters, right? So if you want to follow along the Kube Academy courses here, for example, that's actually what's possible. And again, all you need to do is sign up with your email address, right? So these are some of the trainings that are being delivered to get you started, right? So we have getting started with Kubernetes. There is a bunch of lessons in there. So you see it's overall, it's 40 minutes. You see who is the instructor here, and some of the instructors on the team have been doing Kubernetes enablement and training for probably the majority of their time that Kubernetes exists, right? So Jonathan, for example, but there's also Scott Lowe. There's a bunch of others that have done Kubernetes training as they learned this and have been growing with the community for some time. It's a so very knowledgeable trainers that are in these courses, right? And as you see, so it's getting started, it's containers 101, Kubernetes 101, but it's actually going into some of the more advanced topics as well. So how do you build applications for Kubernetes, right? How do you use Kubernetes if you come from a virtual infrastructure administrator background? But there's also things like, okay, what's the business case for Kubernetes actually? How do you leverage kubectl or kubectl as a whatever way you prefer to pronounce it, and then more in-depth analytics, how to prepare for an exam, integrating with cloud providers. So these are all courses that are built around things that we have seen that are relevant across organizations. They are not tied to the Tanzu portfolio specifically, right? They are Kubernetes enablement sessions that are related to Kubernetes, right? So that's why it's a Kube Academy. And you can see a lot of the stuff, right? So networking in Kubernetes. Who would have guessed that this is like a 2 hours and 47 minutes advanced training course? It is a complex thing, right? It goes into all kinds of lessons until we reach the end of this page here, which is around cluster API, for example. And you might have come across that topic as well. So cluster API is our so in the Kubernetes community, it's a project that allows us to spin up Kubernetes clusters in Kubernetes style APIs. So you don't have to worry about installers anymore, but you can actually let Kubernetes manage Kubernetes, right? And again, if you follow the courses here, you can have a local cluster running and then leverage that for actually doing some of the stuff yourself. So hopefully, oh, here we go. The lab has been deployed. So again, sorry for the delay. It's still being, it's still connecting to some of the vCenters here. So always have a look at this status message down here. In worst case, for whatever reasons, something is not working, just end the session. It will destroy the whole setup, right? And spin up a new one. It's, as I said, it's a virtual environment that's completely nested. So we call that nested. So it's virtual machines running in virtual machines in a very shared environment, as you might guess, right? So it's not a dedicated physical host that you're running on here. We're leveraging the power of infrastructure as a service internally. So yeah, if there's any errors that are not disappearing after a certain time, yeah, please delete the lab and save yourself some time. You have the opportunity, and that's actually pretty cool. You can extend those labs up to 8 times, right? So in the 8 times, so you have 1.5 hours per default. And if you click extend, it will basically extend the lab by an hour, and you can do that up to 8 times, right? So you can deploy a lab right in the morning. It will automatically go to a pause state to not consume CPU and memory all the time in the backend if you're not doing anything with it. But you can extend the time so you can have a full-blown test environment up and running for up to, what is it then, 9.5 hours, I would say. So basically a full business day, and you can play with that technology that you've chosen for the amount of time without setting up anything yourself, right? So that's the cool thing. So let's see if the environment is actually up and running. If not, we'll come back to that in a second. As I said, right now is a time frame where we see a shift 2 time zones active at the same time. Maybe I motivated so many of you to actually go there and overload some of the regional capacity. I don't know, but let's see if the vCenter is already up and running. You can see some of the connection. It's far from optimal. Still connecting to vCenters. Okay, so let me show you some of the lab infrastructure here at the same time. So this is all running in the browser, as you can see, right? So we're connecting to a virtual console of a what we call a hop server, which is a Windows system, right? So there is a PuTTY installed, and typically all the nodes are and all the relevant stuff is either in the manual or there's a README text file on the system, so you can see all the username and password things. If it's more a vSphere related stuff, I mean, whatever labs you find from VMware, the typical default password is VMware 1 bang, right? It's sorry, 1 exclamation mark. So you have all the information in here, but as I said, it's also in the manual, right? And you can make this full screen, right? So it will use the full screen of the browser. You can enable and disable the lab manual, right? So you can also decouple the lab manual and put it on a separate device. So if you have a tablet, for example, or a phone, you can just push that lab manual over to this, and there's typically lab guidance in it, right? So it will give you a basic overview about the modules, right? So introduction to vSphere with Tanzu here, and then managing vSphere with Tanzu, and then working with Tanzu Kubernetes cluster. So it's typically multiple modules that are in this. You can also take a look at the table of contents and then jump right into the topic that's of most interesting to you, right? So you can take, for example, module 1 and go to the vSphere with Tanzu introduction and see what's in there. Some of the stuff is documentation, right? It will give you an overview about the environment that you're looking into. You just move forward. Again, you can size it the way you want. And at one point, it will basically start to give you an overview of how do you actually interact with the system, right? So let's take a look if the lab is available now. Oh, damn it. I've been playing with this all day and I didn't have an issue at all. It's
I'm sure it's all the participants just clicking into the lab now.
Anyway, so sometimes, so this is a virtual window, right? So if you want to input something into this and you're not sure if your keyboard mapping is actually working the way you expect this to work, let's take a look. So there's the hands-on lab interactive simulation. No. Table of contents. So we actually want to go into this live supervisor cluster, for example. So this assumes everything has been enabled, right? So some of the stuff is being accelerated by just going there and making sure it's there. So you have typically a screenshot by screenshot overview of how to access the environment, right? So you go to Chrome, and then you click the region, and then you go to the vCenter or the web client link here. And if you don't want to enter the credentials, you can either say, and I do this in a new in a new notepad. Nope, don't save, doesn't matter. But so we can either type it in here ourselves, but there's also, and that's the trick. So you can click the send text up here, and then this will use your local keyboard, right? So if you want to send some for example, right, which is sometimes a character that's hard to find in a where does this actually come from on my keyboard. So you can enter something in here, copy and paste even, and then click send, and it will show up in the system, right? So this is a way to forward stuff into it. But there's also this cool thing where credentials, for example, are highlighted in the system here. So we can typically take highlight something in the manual here, and then just drag and drop it in here, and it will be put into the system as well, right? So just some useful things, because if you've never played with this before, it might be easier to get started, right? So it seems like the vCenter is here. Everything's up and running now. Checking data stores. So it's doing a lot of backend tasks here. At least we have enough time to play with it. So next thing is you log in, right? So this has been pre-populated by the great folks that have been preparing this lab in the background, right? So we can now log in and should be right in a virtual data center, but as it's still working itself through the preparation task, that might actually still be slightly delayed. So what else do I have on the notes? Oh yeah, we'll come back to that lab in a second. Again, hasn't happened all day. Another area that's super interesting, which I would consider even hands-on, because it's far from being just like high-level overviews. This is typically going very deep into the technologies. Is the TGIC, right? So the thank God it's Kubernetes, and this is typically a weekly video podcast, right? So this has started like a long time ago. So as you can see, there's like 152 episodes, and so this goes all the way back to what is the upgrading to Kubernetes 1.8 with kubeadm. So that was episode number 11. So you can guess how old this stuff is. So this is coming from the former Heptio team, right? That joined VMware a couple of years ago. And so this is more an educational exercise where the team is playing with technologies and explaining in detail what's actually going on in the background, right? So how are networking and services working again? Who would be surprised that this has been a major topic since the very early beginnings? Istio, RBAC, kubeadm, building a controller, continuing the controller, finishing the controller. So this was obviously a more complex task than just an hour. But there's projects that VMware is engaged in, projects that the community is exploring right now, right? So we have a Kubicon and a cluster API back in episode 32, for example, which is a long time ago, right? And other areas when the operator framework was launched, Kata containers, Ballerina, Knative. So you can basically go in here. There's lots of stuff that has, of course, been deprecated probably over time, right? Because the ecosystem is moving very fast, but it's very worthwhile looking into the into these kind of videos. So let's pick one. So gateway APIs featuring Contour, for example. So you'll I forgot how it is to see ads. I'm sorry. So here we go. It's typically very hands-on, right? So we have the walkthrough of some of the GitHub projects that are being used, right? But then there is also a lot of examples that are being placed, lots of questions that are being raised through the chat, right? So if you're more an interactive learner, so you see this is all being done live. So this is Josh working on the Contour stuff, and typically the contributors from the open source project, like Steve, for example, he's part of the Contour team as well, actually joined this this talk live in the same time, right? So highly recommended TGIC, right? So you can find the link here in the notes, right, under this area here. But yeah, so these are just some of the things that I want to highlight it in addition. So we can see now the system is here. It seems like it's partially had some errors, but it's here now. So if we build out the infrastructure, so you can see we have actually 4 ESX hosts, so 4 hypervisor nodes in our lab environment that we spun up earlier. And so these are typically the physical servers, and you can see the virtual machines that are running on these is very limited, right? So right now there's just a HA proxy VM that's running, and then we have the namespaces in here, but it seems like that's not everything. But yeah, as you see, you have a fully running virtual infrastructure. I probably should have deleted it and started from scratch. So yeah, none of the hosts are licensed. So some of the scripts have probably failed and not gone where it should be. So let me end that lab and spin up a new one. Congratulations. Take the survey, not today. But yeah, coming back to the catalog side, as you can see, the website itself allows us to go into a variety of topics. So let's take, for example, what else? So this one has been newly added. I remember this just showed up very recently. So let's see if this is a better shot now. Deploy that. So let me see. Do we have any questions? Do we have any topics? And download the lab guides. Yep, that's correct. Let's see if the average, ooh, there you go. Start time. We actually beat the start time. So here we go. That's the environment up and running. So we can now access Chrome and take a look at, so we see the vSphere UI. See, this is what it typically looks like, right? So authentication, I probably just clicked the wrong button. Oh, we actually go to the Tanzu application catalog here, right? So that's the cloud service. It will ask us for an email address, right? So how do we sign in? Oh, damn it, where's the credentials? You just look at the module here. As you see, double click the icon, type where you want to go, right? And then the email address is this one here. So all we need to do is highlight this, drag and drop it, click next, and this will then ask us for the password. Just to be sure I'm not entering something wrong, I'll just do it like this, sign in. And so that's the typical user experience. So sorry if you had to watch me struggle with the vSphere with Tanzu lab that was not deploying as I wish, as I was hoping for. So again, and that's the Tanzu application catalog, right? And then you can follow the lab at your own pace, right? You can go left and right wherever you want to go, right? And jump in and take a look at Harbor and Octant that are probably being used in this lab as well. So if we go into the table of content, we can deploy an app using Tanzu application catalog, and we can deploy MariaDB or the always famous WordPress example. We can also use the artifacts with a private registry, right, and a private service catalog internally. And then we can mirror some of the artifacts also to a Harbor registry, right? So we can log into Harbor. Let's do that as well, right? So you can just click Harbor up here. This will take us to our unsecure local Harbor registry that didn't get a dedicated thing. So let's see, VMware exclamation mark login, and as you can see, we have a running Harbor here as well. You can create stuff, right? Again, this is not a fake system. This is a fully functional system. We can do all the things, right? So we just created a project here in Harbor, right? And if we go to Octant, we probably even have a local cluster running, and we can see, yep, that's our TKG workload cluster. We probably even have a fully blown vSphere environment running. Wants to open the, yeah, just do it. Here we go. I'll probably send a text. And of course, where is it? Introduction. Or is it just simple? here we go. Now we have a functional environment, actually. That's a lot faster. So again, if you redeploy, it's sometimes easier, right? So we see our ESX clusters, we see our management environment, we see our workload clusters, right? So again, you can play with it, you can destroy it, you can not destroy somebody else's environment or break the lab in itself, right? So this is all a nested virtualization, which prevents you from doing something or doing harm to others, right? So nothing wrong with playing with it and destroying it. Again, this is just the basic vSphere stuff, right? If you go back to my notes and some of the other areas, so you can jump in and take a look at other components, like, for example, the vRealize operations, vRealize automation, and other technologies as well. And this is not even the latest version of the document, just realizing this. So yeah, so we had Tanzu Developer Center, we had the hands-on labs, right? So you need 2 different accounts for these. Kubernetes Academy, we briefly touched on, TGICs we touched on, and then there's a bunch more resources that you can play with, right? But I think most useful from a using somebody else's resources are the ones that I mentioned above. So there's the Modern Apps Ninja program that is also used by us internally, right? So providing courses for testing and playing with this, right? So there's vSphere with Tanzu and getting to know those technologies. There's like a learning path attached to it, which is quite useful. But there is also, if you want to learn more, there's also some of the books that are available through distributions and in physical copies for some cache that you can also download, right? So one of them is, one of these books is actually the Production Kubernetes ebook that was just launched, or I'm not even sure if it's being published yet. I think this is like the first early access copy that was available. So you can get that in exchange for your email address. So that's super useful. There's also the Knative in Action book that's available, right? And I mentioned it earlier, there is the education team that has been doing the Kubernetes Academy pieces, which is now in part of the Tanzu Labs and Tanzu Education portfolio. So you can, of course, beyond the stuff you find online, we have a lot more detailed courses for delivery in a virtual classroom, or once this is possible again in a physical classroom, right? So, but you find all the trainings and certification path also on the Tanzu Education website, right? So what else do I have? So we had this, we had this, so the session expired, that's great. We have the hands-on labs, we had this, just clicking through my tabs here to see if not missed anything. So we had the Knative one. And yeah, one of the things that I just wanted to mention, right? If you're playing with Kubernetes, if you're playing with containers, right, and you want to isolate some of the stuff, you want to actually play with a full-blown VM and do some more decent efforts than what you can do in a container, for example, we have that virtual machine software that we call Fusion, which is for Mac, and Workstation, that is for Windows PCs, right? So if you want to run something locally, we have those available, and they have actually been made available for free. So there is a free Fusion player, right, where you can run virtual machines on your system. And there is also a Pro edition where you get a lot more capabilities out of this, right? But you can get these. This has only been introduced, I think, last year, right? And so Fusion and Workstation are the local virtualization products of VMware. And again, for personal use, you can use them on your local machine. And a colleague of mine, so shout out to Robert, he has been looking at this end of last year. We introduced what we call Project Nautilus, and Nautilus allows you to have a way to run those kind clusters in virtual machines very efficiently directly on the virtual machine layer of Fusion, right? So it's a pretty cool thing. Which allows you to spin up clusters and interact with them through what we call the vCTL. So it's a CLI tool to talk to Fusion a workstation, which is powering the same ideas also in the data center virtualization product, right? So in vSphere, the idea of the CRX container runtime that's also used for virtual machines running containers in vSphere is a similar thing that we use in this. There is a getting started guide that's in here. I'll add that to the GitHub links later on. That just popped to my mind before I started the session here. But yeah, I mean, that's basically all I wanted to show, right? So most important is probably the site. So feel free to come here and take a look at all the resources and then explore it yourself. And if you have questions, always feel free to reach out, of course, here on the chat. So I'll be available here for the rest of the time. But if you have other questions or just want to get in touch, feel free to reach out on Twitter, right? So my handle, oh, you can see it up there. So that's should be fine. So with that being said, thank you for coming. I hope you had a fantastic day, enjoyed all the sessions that have been running so far. And if you're watching this as recording, I hope you enjoyed that too. So looking at the chat, thank you for the materials. Great. Wow, it's super positive. Using Fusion, can we access? Yep, I mean, you can also, I mean, Fusion is just an abstraction layer, right? So you can access, or you can build your own virtual machines and start from there, but feel free to reach out if you have questions. Q&A, I think we have everything answered. Matthias, back to you.